Call it the Great Generational Workplace Divide. On one side, baby boomers who think they've got everything figured out thanks to their age and experience. On the other, millennials who think boomers got all the breaks and are hanging on to their jobs too long. I recently had a chance to speak to the author of a new book that argues that divide is hurting business and it's time to start building bridges. Peter Shurman is the author of Millennials, Boom or Bust, or How Gen Y Will Save the World. So, Peter, I guess from that title, we can assume you think the millennial generation has been maybe judged a bit unfairly?
I think they have, and I think the judgment comes largely at the hands of my cohort, the baby boomers. Largely, if I talk to friends and colleagues, they like to say things like, this is a stupid generation that lives with its eyes glued to a cell phone and doesn't care about what's going on in the world. And my research suggests that that's anything but the truth.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about your research. Who did you talk to and what did you find?
Well, the first part of the research didn't start out being research, and it didn't start out being for a book. I was in the same business you're in, broadcasting. Later, I was in the politics business, where I was an elected member of the Ontario legislature. And in both of those businesses, there are always up-and-comers, and those up-and-comers tend to be of that age. So I got to know millennials on a first-hand basis, on a daily basis. And I thought, what an interesting thing to write a blog about. So I wrote, I think, kind of a nice blog piece complimenting the generation on the way it worked, and saying that, you know, if we had done a little bit better job when we were younger, maybe things wouldn't be in such a mess today. But as things went on, and I decided that there was a book in my future, I started to research everything I could find on millennials, and I discovered things about their political leanings, I discovered things about their financial leanings, about what they thought of families and when to have them, and what they thought most of all about our generation, which is that they don't want to be like us, although we do have a respect.
Right, interesting. Well, I want to hear more about that, but let's just backtrack for a minute. You said you wrote the blog post that was giving them compliments. Tell us just a little bit about what you were saying.
Well, what I was saying was it's the most educated generation around, that the seminal event that informs their lives was probably the Great Recession of 08, 09, and informing their lives means that they developed a healthy respect for money that perhaps it's not unfair to say my generation didn't have. So if you take a look at statistics, what you find, for example, is that they're not that trustful of banking institutions or financial advisors the way we were, that they are better savers, that as a percentage of their net worth, which admittedly is lower at that stage of life, they have more money in the bank than we ever did.
So now the book is aimed at people who are working with millennials.
Largely it is, and it could be read by a millennial person or a boomer person to try to interpret one to the other. But if you put a gun to my head and said, who would benefit most by reading Millennials, Boom or Bust? It would be my generation, because my generation has a couple of flaws, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Really, and one of the flaws is that we always thought that we were going to live forever, and some of my colleague boomers still do. And they also think that 70 is the new 50. 70 isn't the new 50. It's just 70 with a hip replacement.
Okay, but now I notice you say, you know, this is how you manage millennials, but you also point out how to be managed by millennials, because of course that's happening too, right?
That is happening, but it's happening at a slower pace than one would expect. In 2015, millennials became the largest cohort within the workforce, and in 2016, they became the largest cohort within the population, owing to the fact that if you take a look at my year of birth, 1947, 25% of those who were born in the same year aren't with us anymore, which is a little bit terrifying to people like me, but that's just the normal ebb and flow of life. So what I'm exhorting my colleague my colleague boomers to do with millennials is learn to understand them, learn that they need more feedback meaning every day, and if necessary, every hour, because they are very collegial and they're very communicative. After all, they were born into a generation that already had the cell phone.
And give us a few other suggestions of how it's different working with millennials than it is working with boomers.
Well, let me amplify on the issue of collegiality. In my generation, if the boss said, and the boss was all powerful then, I want you to work in a group with this person, that person, and the next person, it wasn't so abnormal to hear, well, I don't want to work with her because I don't want to work with a female, or I don't want to work with him because he comes from another country and has a strange accent, or he's not the same color as me, which sounds hideous, but believe it or not, it's true. Today, Today, those barriers are gone. There is no recognition on the part of millennials that there's any differential between a person, let's say, with body art than there is with somebody who doesn't have it. No differentiation between someone who comes from Africa and someone who comes from the Yukon. No differentiation at all. Therefore, if you have the stuff, meaning the smarts and the education and the know-how, they'll sit down and work with you. And when they're not sitting down and working, they'll work 24/7 by being electronically connected. It's a brave new world.
So you've talked a lot about the benefits of millennials and that they're very hardworking and good savers and all this sort of thing. But the complaint a lot of people make is that the young people these days, they're too entitled. They expect an office and a bigger salary and to be promoted more quickly and so forth. Did any of your research show that to be true?
Absolutely, and you've nailed it in the sense that the average person coming out of university with, let's say, an MBA, to take a middle-of-the-road degree, believes that they should probably start off as a vice president with a promise to be president of whatever company they join, and after all, they're lining up, aren't they, by next year. That couldn't be further from the truth. As an elected representative in the province of Ontario, when I knocked on doors in a suburb where there were a lot of people of that age, I would meet parents who would say, "Can you help me? My kid has an MBA and a PhD and he's working as a cashier at a fast food place." The problem, of course, is that there are a lot of people with great education. There are not so many jobs that millennial entitled people, to use your phrase, can have what they want immediately any more than our generation could, and arguably less.
All right. Well, lots of reason to keep working together there. Thanks so much for being with us, Peter.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.